Hey everyone, Tack here. So I wanted to start a series about Dungeons & Dragons. For those of you who don't know, I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons since I was like 13 or 14. It's been almost 20 years. And I wanted to start a series to share some of my D&D stories. Now the first story I'm calling Explosive Introductions. Now in the story, I was a newer DM and wasn't quite as good at coming up with things on the fly for when players come out of nowhere with their crazy schemes, like they usually do. Now, a few things you should know. First is, we're using 3.5 rules. The biggest reason for this is it's the version I play the most, I grew up playing it. I had some experience with 4th edition, in fact, one of my favorite ridiculous characters I ever made was in 4th edition. But that story's for another time. Now 5th edition was out, and there were some supplementary books to it as well, and I do like 5, but I love 3.5, and if I'm gonna run a game, it's gonna be 3.5. There's just so many options, and you can access all the content for free. I do have about 10 of the books, but it's really easy that you can get any book online or just use websites to find anything you need. The next thing you should know is I was using a critical hit table, where you roll percentages to determine your critical hit or critical fail, and it's different depending on the type of weapon your damage does. It's also affected by whether or not the target has a helm or a shield. This table though is pretty broken. You can instantly kill things, or the critical fail can have you crit on allies. You can even crit fail, then roll in the critical hit table, and then it'll tell you to roll 3 extra times and add all of that up. You can do some serious damage to your allies on accident. I once had a character get their arm cut off by an enemy. They then turned around and critted on the enemy and chopped their enemy's leg off. It's almost like something out of Monty Python. Now I had this one player, we'll call him Shane. Shane was one of those players who tends to do weird stuff in games or accidentally does amazing stuff. And sometimes he'll try to use some silly logic to argue his favor in something he wants to do. When making a character, he once came up to me and asked, "Can we agree that every action has an equal and opposite reaction?" Now what he was trying to do was make a character that could go through enemy squares. But there's a rule that if he ends his character on an enemy square, he takes some force damage. His argument was the person's square that he stops in should also take the force damage. I ended up not allowing it, arguing that magic doesn't follow the rules of physics, which is why it's magic, and it probably wouldn't have worked out well for him anyways. Now I tell you about Shane because he was in this campaign. In fact, this story essentially revolves around his character. He had a pretty crazy build at the time. He was a half troll, half orc warlock that took a dip into fighter and specialized in the long spear. He took some aberration feats to make himself a size bigger, and another one to increase his reach. He had monkey grip so he could hold a spear another category size bigger, which was huge. His reach ended up being like 15 to 30 feet after all the bonuses. He had 36 strength, so his damage was like 3d6 plus 15, and he could channel magic through his spear and hit people with it. He also had a companion that was like level 3, who would just hold a tower shield to give him full cover. I made him roll for some of the stuff, but he mainly had to spend just huge hordes of gold to be able to afford it and have a level 3 companion with him. Overall, the companion was basically just a very strong but very scared guy holding a massive shield for this weird abomination of a character to stand behind and throw spells out at everybody. As you can tell just by the description, this character was pretty damn powerful. The group in total I think was around level 12, right at that point where even regular, vanilla builds of characters start to get ridiculously powerful. Remember, this is when I was a beginner DM. I loved helping people make crazy builds. Although this one I think he created by himself, often the group had some real power creep characters. I'd build encounters to match, and at times, that meant some players just got wrecked when the CR was a bit too high. Now in this setting, magic was highly regulated. Very few people had it, and those that did had lots of power in the kingdom. Or if you weren't high enough ranking official, you were considered an apostate to the kingdom, an outlaw by default. So the characters had to be careful who they used magic around. I was inspired a bit by Dragon Age, at the time having just finished either Dragon Age Asunder or Dragon Age The Calling, I don't remember which one. Anyways, the first problems really started showing after Shane killed a shop owner in a small town. He had used magic, but he didn't want people to think that it was magic, so he said he was going to stab the body with a knife, and rolled for it. In this instance, he crit failed, and it said hit ally. The only one around was his companion at the time, so I imagine that he brought the knife back with his hand to stab him, but held the knife the wrong way and stabbed his buddy. He was able to save his companion, and the adventure continued. Now, my wife was in this campaign, and her character died. She usually likes help making a character, and because of the setting, I suggested the book Savage Species. For anyone who doesn't know, Savage Species is a 3.5 book that allows you to make yourself a monster in D&D. There are already ways to make yourself monsters, but this book was all about making yourself a monster. The book also makes it much easier to do, especially if the group was at high enough level adjustment to be that monster in the first place, straight out of the monster manual. This allowed you to grow up or level up as the monster, and had essentially character tables much like the PHB. Now, when people make characters from the Savage Species book, this often meant two things. One, that you didn't have many hit points, because you don't get hit points at every monster level usually, as a way to adjust the character to be more balanced. And two, that you have low armor because you don't have any armor you can wear. You're not proficient in wearing any kind of armor. So low AC and low health often leads to death if the character is not careful. My wife jumped at the idea and spent pretty much a full day looking at all the different monsters and what she wanted to be. She wanted to be good at range combat, but have utility outside of that as well. She ended up making a Drider. Now, if you don't know what a Drider is a drow, which is an evil type of elf essentially, and a spider combined. They are badass and can really do a lot of damage on the battlefield. Now, introducing her character wasn't going to be too hard. At this point in the campaign, the group decided that they didn't want to be part of the kingdom, and in fact wanted to overthrow it. They had already been attacking supply lines and taking on cities as well. They were already pretty powerful around level 12. The group discovered a convoy of essentially prisoners of the magical variety and monstrous variety, and decided to ambush it. This made it really easy to introduce the Drider as a character, since she could just be a prisoner that gets freed and joins the group. This would also be a way to introduce more NPCs that would aid the group in fighting the kingdom. Well, the group set up an ambush and the attack was on. One character started it by blowing up the horses on the first carriage, and some of the NPC mages that had freed that were lower level made essentially trenches by shifting dirt behind the last cart, trapping all the carts on the road, or they could try to make their way through the forest. Because there were so many guards and many of them were mage hunters, they decided to fight. Some of the creatures and casters in the wagons were able to break free, one of which was my wife's Drider. Once free, she started grabbing her gear out of a chest on the side of the wagon. This is where Shane character comes up yelling and screaming about wanting to murder all the guards, and swings at one of them with a spear that was about to attack my wife's character from behind. And of course, he critically fails. He rolls on the critical fail table and it says, roll 2 more times and add the results. The first roll is hit friend double damage. The second one is critically hit friend. I took this to mean since he only had one attack, he critically hits his friend and doubles the crit damage. Remember that his character is incredibly strong, and after adding up all the dice from the crit alone, it was like 60 damage, and then doubled that to 120. I knew it was going to be a big problem because after helping her make her Drider, she only had about 55 hit points. Her character essentially exploded into a pile of gore. My wife wasn't too happy that her new character she had spent hours on before the game was just turned to a cloud of pink mist. Shane was doing his best to look anywhere in the room but her. This was the first time I had a character die during their introduction. I did become much better keeping characters alive while being introduced. In fact, one of the times, Shane was having one of his characters introduced. He was held hostage by a group of cultists in a cave, and another player who we'll call Andy, usually plays casters of the undead variety specifically, decided he didn't care if anyone else was in the cave, he just wanted all of them to die. So he cast Cloudkill into the cave, and then used Gust of Wind to push the cloud deeper. Cloudkill is exactly what it sounds like. It's a cloud that kills you. If you are 3 or fewer hit dice, you don't even get a save, you just die. If you have 4 to 6 hit dice, you have to succeed on a save or die. If you succeed, you take 1d4 points of con damage every turn. 7 hit die and above take 1d4 points of con damage or save for half as much. Holding your breath doesn't do anything, although if you're immune to poison, you're immune to the spell. Now, Shane's character was essentially in a metal cage in the middle of the room surrounded by cultists about to be sacrificed, and there would have been no way he could have survived the cloud kill without some DM intervention. So I pulled some plot armor out of my ass, and he was in a magical cage where spells can't penetrate in or out unless the magic barrier lock is penetrated. And he also made sure let his cloud sit for the maximum amount of time just to make sure everything was dead, and then to top it off, threw a fireball into the area as well. Anyway, that's my story of characters meeting their end in their beginning. I hope you enjoyed.